You can't treat people as subhuman over the course of decades or generations and expect them to be cowed. Martin Luther King once said, "Never underestimate a man's desire to be free." And I think one thing that the Israelis have always done is they've underestimated the Palestinian desire to be free.
In the shadowy corridors of American intelligence, few names provoked and still provoke as much heated debate as John Kiriakou. Once a CIA counterterrorism officer who was deeply entrenched in the world of covert operations across the globe, John crossed the Rubicon when he publicly denounced the agency's use of torture. This bold move thrust him into the spotlight, earning him both lauded praise as a whistleblower and vehement condemnation as a traitor. In my conversation with John, we are not just peeling back the layers of a man's conscience, we are diving headfirst into the murky waters of ethical ambiguity, national security, and the high stakes of America's loss of moral accountability. If you watch the following interview, be prepared to question your assumptions and to confront the uncomfortable truth lurking behind the veil of America's war on terror. But before we do, a quick call to action. Some of the best interviews on this channel are shadow banned, which means YouTube is not presenting them to you, the viewer. The latest example is my interview with James Bamford, where we discussed the truly amazing story that underlies Benjamin Netanyahu's corruption scandal. Did you know that a Hollywood billionaire not only stole nuclear secrets from America, but then sold them to Israel? And that Netanyahu helped him to stay out of troubles to this very day? And then Netanyahu turned around and started to ask for favors, hence the bribery charges in Israel against him. Other examples are the interviews with the so-called Hamas lawyer Stanley Cohen, or the interview with the former chief of staff of Colin Powell, who told me that the white powder in the test tube that Colin Powell showed the world when he testified at the UN just before the war on Iraq was actually salt. So if you're interested in content that apparently you're not supposed to see, content that goes against the mainstream narrative, have a look at some of the previous interviews that we have recorded for your pleasure. And of course, it really helps to spread the news if you like and subscribe to this channel. John Kiriakou, what a pleasure having you. How's it going in... Where are you?
I'm in Arlington, Virginia, just a couple kilometers from the White House. Doing well. Thanks for having me.
Wow, a couple of kilometers from the White House. What? How fitting! How fitting!
I could walk there.
Yes. John, I have you on my radar for quite a while, so I'm very happy that this conversation come to be. I have a couple of notes in front of me, and basically I do not know where to start. It's just amazing. Yeah. I also saw I saw basically any interviews that I could get my hands on where you have spoken. Now, what I would like to focus on is the Middle East in general and Israel-Palestine in particular. Knowing that you have expertise on not only that area, but on that area and many other areas. But before we do, and I know it's a tricky one, John. Yeah, I've heard you speaking about yourself before, but in a nutshell, for viewers who do not know you, how can you, yeah, that's a tricky one. Yeah, how can you describe yourself in a nutshell? Yeah, with all that happened, with all that you did, and how you came to be where you are today.
Well,
easy one, huh? To start with.
Yeah, easy one. I spent almost 15 years at the CIA working on the Middle East, mostly on Iraq. And I spent 2.5 years as the senior investigator on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee after that, working for John Kerry, also mostly on the Middle East. But I guess I'm probably better known for exposing the CIA's torture program. I blew the whistle on the torture program in 2007, paid with it for my freedom in 2013, and since 2015, I've been a journalist, an author, columnist, commentator, out there speaking.
Yeah. you virtually risk it all because there was no way of predicting how that would end for you. It could have been 10 or 20 or whatever years. You were lucky in that sense that it was only, 30 months or so they gave you, right?
Right, 30 months, and I served 23.
Yeah, but if you've seen on other whistleblowers, that's not always the case. Yeah, so I'm very fortunate to.
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but in fact, I got the shortest sentence of any of the national security whistleblowers, and I attended the sentencing hearings of people like Jeffrey Sterling and Daniel Hale, and my name came up in sentencing where the judge actually said, "I'll give you Kiriakou plus 12 months or Kiriakou plus 30 months." It was awful, but I'll tell you, I had very, very good attorneys. And I had a little bit of gray mail in my background. We can talk about that. And so the Justice Department was very angry that my attorneys were able to negotiate a short sentence. And so they sought to take out their frustrations and anger on future national security whistleblowers.
And if you briefly discuss your history in the CIA, yeah. What are the key? Yeah.
Sure. I started in January of 1990 as an analyst on Iraq. I served overseas in Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and 2 years in Bahrain, and then went back to CIA headquarters again working on Iraq. I got bored with that after 7 years, and so I made a very unusual change to counterterrorism operations. I speak both Greek and Arabic, so I went to Greece as the counterterrorism representative. And then after September 11th, I went to Pakistan as the CIA's chief of counterterrorism operations. Went back to headquarters after leading the capture of Abu Zubaydah, who we believed at the time was the number 3, we believed incorrectly, was the number 3 in Al-Qaeda. And then on the strength of that capture, I was named the executive assistant to the CIA's deputy director for operations and finished my career at the United Nations.
Yeah, I wanted to flush this out to highlight that you were not just another analyst in the CIA. You had a serious career there, right?
I did. I was very fortunate.
Now, meanwhile, and I have a list in front of you. It may not be comprehensive, but you're also a prolific writer. You have written about your experience in a number of books, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So The Reluctant Spy, right? Then Doing Time Like a Spy. I like the title, yeah. Yeah, The Convenient Terrorist, yeah, CIA Lies, CIA Whistleblower, The CIA Inside's Guide to the Iran Crisis. Yeah, that's a very interesting one. Honorable Cause, so 5, 6, 7 books, right? So and you translate your experience from the time in those books, yeah. Now,
yes, I do.
When we talk about your career, there was, of course, and you mentioned his name already, Abu Zubaydah, yeah. So again, in a nutshell, because this is not what I want to focus on here, but in a nutshell, what happened? What did you do and what were your achievements? And very important what you said, at the time it was believed he was number 3. So explain.
That's the key. At the time, in the spring of 2002, the CIA believed that Abu Zubaydah was the number 3 in Al-Qaeda and that he had been instrumental in the planning for the 9/11 attacks. None of that was true. He had never pledged fealty to Osama bin Laden. He had never been the number 3 in Al-Qaeda, and indeed, he had never even joined Al-Qaeda. He was a bad guy. He worked with Al-Qaeda as a facilitator, let's say. He founded Al-Qaeda's training camps in Kandahar and Helmand province in southern Afghanistan. He founded Al-Qaeda's safe house called the House of Martyrs in Peshawar, Pakistan. He could get you false passports and money and clean phones, and he could get you into Afghanistan or out of Afghanistan, but he was never the number 3. We spared no expense, financially or by way of manpower, in finding him. It took us 6 weeks, and we found him, and we captured him. Now, the reason that's important is because of this belief that he was the number 3 in Al-Qaeda. He was the first so-called high-value target, HVT, that we had captured, and the first one to undergo merciless torture at the hands of CIA officers and contractors.
Yeah, and I think Iraq was, of course, a crucial moment in U.S. history. Yeah, so the things that are in my memory are the interviews with Madeleine Albright, for example, where she said that she found it justified that we, the West, starved 500,000 Iraqi children to death. Yeah,
Yes.
and then, let me ask you a question. Yeah. I'm sure you know this iconic image from Colin Powell testifying at the UN with this little glass tube and this white powder. Do you know what was in the glass tube?
Yeah, there was nothing. It was a prop. It was a prop. I remember those debates very, very clearly. So imagine you have all of the affected analysts from the entire intelligence community. So we're talking about CIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, DIA, the Department of Energy, everybody who has a stake in trying to figure out if Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. And the consensus was that Iraq did not have weapons of mass destruction. The consensus was they did at one time, and I can explain that in a moment. But there was no evidence that they did at that time. But there was a political decision that had been made at the White House to invade Iraq and to overthrow Saddam Hussein. And so the Bush administration was looking for analysis to support the policy, which is exactly the opposite of what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to take the analysis to create the policy, right? You have to base the policy on the truth. They did the opposite. So in the end, when George Tenet, the CIA director, told President Bush that it was a slam dunk, his words, that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, then the decision was made to invade Iraq. There was no intelligence analysis to support the conclusion at all. None. And so what you're talking about, that famous image of Colin Powell sitting at the table, the United Nations Security Council table, with John Negroponte behind one shoulder and George Tenet behind the other shoulder, that was meant to imply that the U.S. government was 100% certain that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, and the entire policy was based on a lie.
And I know that it was sold because I had Colin Powell's chief of staff, Colonel Larry Wilkerson, on, and he told me it was sold. I was lucky I was sitting on the chair, otherwise I almost fell off. Yeah,
it was all fake. It was all fake.
Incredible. If you regard the consequences, yeah, there were 1 million dead plus in the interim between those first and second Gulf War, there's 500,000 staff. I mean, it's just unbelievable. Yeah, but you said then the decision was being made. But was it not so that years before already, America had planned to basically produce a regime change or invade 7 countries?
Well, I can give you some background on that. When I came back from Pakistan, on the strength of the Abu Zubaydah capture, I mentioned a minute ago, I was promoted to the position of executive assistant to the CIA's deputy director for operations. I went in on my very first day, and I was very excited. Right, I'm going to be working on the executive floor of the CIA. The director is there, the deputy directors. It's the brain of the CIA. I was so excited, and I went into the office and I said, "So, what do we do?" And the deputy director said to me, "I can't tell you anything until you go to security and sign your secrecy agreements." So I had to go to the Office of Security, and they had prepared 6 separate secrecy agreements for me to sign. Now, these were classified contracts saying that I would never reveal what it was that I was working on or what I learned in that position unless the CIA decided to declassify the information. So I went into the Office of Security and I said, "What's up?" They said, you have to sign these. So I signed each one of the 6. And when I finished, I said, okay, so what's up? And the security officer said, well, and he took a breath. He said, next year, we're going to invade Iraq. We're going to overthrow Saddam Hussein. And we're going to open the world's largest Air Force base in southern Iraq so that we can move all of our air assets out of Saudi Arabia to deprive Osama bin Laden of the ability to say that we are polluting the land of the 2 holy mosques. I was so taken aback by this. I stammered out, but we haven't found bin Laden yet, thinking foolishly that that should be our top priority 6 months after 9/11. And the security director said, look, the decision's been made. And he said the battle lines have been drawn. He said that State Department, Joint Chiefs of Staff, and CIA were opposed to the invasion. But the supporters of the invasion were the Office of the Vice President, the Office of the Secretary of Defense, and the National Security Council. And there was nothing we could do to stop it. Later on, about 9 months later, the day before we crossed the border into Iraq, I was the note taker in a meeting. It's called a Secure Video Teleconference, a CIVITS, that was chaired by Vice President Cheney. And it included George Tenet, the CIA director. I was George's note taker. It included Secretary of State Powell, National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice, and a number of other very, very senior officials, including the 4-star general who was the commander of U.S. Central Command. So the vice president begins the meeting and says, General, will you give us a briefing on the status of forces? To tell you the truth, I've always been bored by status of forces briefings. I don't understand them. They're boring. I don't care. He's saying elements of the 1st Division are here and elements of the 15th Cavalry Unit are there and these ones are moving here and these ones are moving there. It means nothing to me. So he's giving this briefing. And then the last thing he says is, if all go as planned, we can be in Tehran by August. And very discreetly, George Tenet leans forward and turns off his microphone. And he turns to me. Yeah. I was sitting right behind his shoulder, and he turns to me and he says, did he say Tehran or did he say Baghdad? And I said, he said Tehran. And George said, have these people lost their minds? And then he turned the microphone back on. So when the meeting was over, I went back to my office and the deputy director said, how was the meeting? And I said, did you know we were going to invade Iran? And he said, are they still talking about that? He said, we're not going to invade Iran. The problem is none of these people have any understanding of the Middle East and none of them know anything about Middle Eastern history. We're not going to invade Iran. It's a pipe dream. And then the next day we crossed the border into Iraq with a prediction from the senior director at the National Security Council that Iraqis would throw flowers at our troops when we crossed the border. And then the rest, of course, is history.
Yeah. So, I mean, the reasoning is interesting, yeah? So we already established that the Americans, or we the West, starved 500,000 children to death. And then in the second time around, they still expect, to be thrown with flowers. Yeah. Incidentally,
I'm sorry to interrupt. There was so much internal propaganda, not just at the CIA, but in the United States, that Saddam Hussein was so evil, he was the embodiment of evil, that regardless of what the United States had done to that country over the previous decade, we would be welcomed as liberators. And that just was not true. That was not the reality.
I Just prior to talking to you, I saw an interview with General Wesley Clark on Democracy Now!, where he also recounts how he was informed about those 7 countries to be invaded and how puzzled he was. And then he makes sure it's an unnamed source. He can't say the name of the person who he was talking to, yeah. But he asked the person who told him that why, and nobody was able to give him the answer.
No, there's a famous story about Richard Pearl. Richard Pearl is a famous, maybe infamous neoconservative. He has been a lifelong Democrat, but he was a major advisor to the George W. Bush White House. And there's a famous story that on September 12th, 2001, he went to see the vice president and he said, we have to invade Iraq, right? Right? And was the first one to sort of put that seed into the mind of Dick Cheney. There was never any evidence that Saddam Hussein had anything to do with 9/11. And on the contrary, Osama bin Laden hated Saddam Hussein as much as he hated us. There was nothing Muslim about Saddam Hussein. But this was something that the neoconservatives had planned for many, many years.
The other way around was also true. Saddam Hussein hated or feared or however you call it, and he killed them where he found them. Yeah,
that's right.
So it's a mutual distaste here.
That's right.
Yeah, it would be very tempting to go into 9/11, but let's not do that. Yeah, we said we talk about Israel. So in the context of that conversation, I would be very interested to, and this is a brutal switch now. Yeah, I know. Yeah, but if we talk about Israel, and let's start with October the 7th. But before we do, the first 1 or 2 months, every interviewer his or her first question was to the interviewee, do you condemn Hamas? Yeah, already framing the whole story. Yeah, but from your perspective, with your experience in the Middle East, so let's start generally. What's your view on October the 7th? What happened and why?
Well, certainly October 7th did not actually begin on October 7th. It began in 1948. So just sort of as an analytic overview, you can't treat people as subhuman. You can't treat people as subhuman over the course of decades or generations and expect them to be cowed. Martin Luther King once said, never underestimate a man's desire to be free. And I think one thing that the Israelis have always done is they've underestimated the Palestinian desire to be free. For so many decades, we've seen settlers just confiscating Palestinian land, burning Palestinian olive orchards, taking Palestinian homes, beating, in many cases, killing Palestinians, incarcerating them to no end with no reason. And you get to a point where you can't take it anymore. And so, is Hamas a terrorist organization? I think probably an argument could be made that it's a freedom fighting organization. It's an organization dedicated to the liberation of its people. What pushed us over the edge finally was the election of the hardest right-wing government in the history of Israel. I mean, things have been bad for a long time. But when you take people who have been convicted of acts of terrorism, convicted of anti-Arab or anti-Muslim hate crimes, and you put them in charge of security over their victims, well, what do you expect is going to happen? What do you think is going to happen? Now, in many cases, I blame the United States for this, because if you go back and look at presidential statements or statements made by secretaries of state between, say, 1948 and the early to mid 1980s, you will find far more balance than what we see today. There's no balance today. If you're elected to Congress, if you achieve a ranking position at the State Department or even at the Defense Department, or certainly at the National Security Council, you are expected to fall into line and be 100% pro-Israel. You see the same thing happening on Capitol Hill. Yes, or you're out. I remember when I first became the senior investigator at the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, virtually the first call I had was from AIPAC, the American Israel Political Affairs Committee. And they said, hey, you don't know us, but we're AIPAC, and congratulations on your new job. We would like to offer you a free trip to Israel, all expenses paid, and we want to give you a tour and show you the place. And I said, not in a million years. Thank you very much. And I declined. Actually, everybody declined. So, just over the last couple of decades, we've gotten to this point where any criticism of Israel, or even worse, any criticism of Benjamin Netanyahu as a leader or as a person is deemed to be anti-Semitic. I can't tell you how many Jewish friends or former Jewish colleagues I have who have been accused of anti-Semitism. It's like, are you stupid? They're Jewish. They just don't agree with the policy that you agree with. So this is something we really have to fight. Mm-hmm. It's very convenient, and it's worse with BDS legislation. Many of us, many of us, support BDS, boycott, sanctions, and divestment, or we support the idea behind BDS. But now, something like 40 states or 42 states in the U.S. have anti-BDS laws. So if I am invited to give a speech, for example, this happened to a dear friend of mine. If I'm invited to give a speech at a university, and the university accepts state funding, which they almost all do, I have to sign a document pledging my support for Israel.
Wow.
I'm not Israeli. I don't support Israel. So why in the world should my ability to make a living depend on my sworn statement that I support Israel? I won't do it. So this is in the court system now being appealed, saying this is unconstitutional. I will not pledge fealty to a foreign government. I won't do it. But this is how bad things have gotten in the United States, where you cannot debate the Arab-Israeli issue without being branded an anti-Semite. It's outrageous.
So the influence of Israel in America, I mean, if you start talking about this, you're right away conspiracy theorist, right? But there is a very tangible and very massive influence of the Israel lobby, AIPAC, you already named it, right? In the US. And in the US, you have like Noam Chomsky told me, you have about 80 million Christian fundamentalists,
yes,
which are actually on the side of Israel, without which no American president will be elected. So, they need the support of this massive... Please.
Yes, I apologize again.
No. It's your show.
In 2008, after I blew the whistle on the torture program, I got a call from Liberty University. If your viewers don't know what Liberty University is, it is the largest evangelical Christian university in the world. It is intensely conservative, hardcore right-wing conservative Bible-based university. And they asked me if I would teach a course in intelligence studies. And I said, why in the world would you call me? You and I
was wondering the same.
Yeah. I said, you and I probably disagree on 99% of the issues. We probably disagree about what the weather is going to be like tomorrow. And without missing a beat, he said, because torture's not Christian. And I said, okay, you know what? I'll take it. And I ended up teaching like 6 courses there over the course of years. I made some friends, not many. I think that they have crazy political ideas, but they're nice enough people. This idea of evangelical support for Israel is something that I've never understood until one of them explained it to me. The bottom line is they don't care about Israel. They really genuinely don't care. What they care about is the reference in the Bible saying that Jesus Christ will come back when all of the Jews are returned to Israel. And so they believe that if they support the Israeli government and the Israeli government's effort to encourage Aliyah, or the return of Jews, then Jesus will come, the end of the world will be upon us, we all go to heaven except the bad people that will be left behind, and that's going to be the end of it. So this is this very odd philosophy that they can force future biblical events through contemporary political means. It sounds insane to me, but they genuinely believe it. And you're right. If you're a Republican, a national candidate for office, and happen to be a Republican, you need those evangelicals to get elected. And so you're going to pledge allegiance to Israel, rather. Sorry. And on the other hand, if you're a Democrat, and most American Jews happen to be Democrats, you're going to do exactly the same thing, because it's the Israelis represent democracy and freedom. It's the only democracy in the Middle East. People are fond of saying incorrectly, I might add. And so, with the millions and millions, maybe billions of dollars that American Jews pour into U.S. elections, if you want to win election or re-election, you're going to toe the line.
Yeah. So there is Israeli influence, right, or in America, and there's Israeli infiltration. And this is something I would like to discuss with you, and I have a very specific example. It's not, I have like 4 pages in preparation of this interview, but it's not on my list here. But Israel's nuclear program, shrouded in mystery up until now, still not officially recognized, all kinds of things. Yeah, and I stumbled across this when I started to research the 3 corruption charges against Netanyahu. One of them is particularly interesting because it involves Aaron Milchan. Does this name ring a bell?
No, it sure doesn't.
Okay. I come to a question at the end of this. Yeah. So Aaron Milchan is one of the most successful Hollywood producers ever. This guy produced Pretty Woman, 10 Years of Slave, Fight Club, whatever. Yeah, he is an Israeli super spy. Yeah, he was working for Lacan. Yeah, one of his operations got blown, so the FBI knew since 20 years that this gentleman, this billionaire and arms dealer, by the way, I forgot to mention, is an Israeli spy. And the best part of it, and this is where Netanyahu comes in again, Netanyahu was involved. So Milchan got a problem in America. Milchan had an interview in Israel, a Hebrew, and thinking nobody in the US understands Hebrew, he thought he can talk. Yeah. As a result of this interview, his 10-year visa, normal people don't get a 10-year visa, but this gentleman got a 10-year visa, got revoked. He then went to Netanyahu, said, help me. Netanyahu went to John Kerry 3 times, it's documented 3 times, to reinstate the visa, which eventually happened. Yeah. And since then, Netanyahu is asking for favors. But my point of this whole story is, we know for a fact from FBI documents obtained through the Freedom of Information Act that both Milchan and Netanyahu were personally involved in stealing, smuggling nuclear secrets out of the US. This is documented. So, coming back to the infiltration of Israel in America, is there no this is known to the FBI, and it must have been known or is known to the CIA. So why is America not defending at least itself, against this infiltration? That's what these are huge American geostrategic interests even, and they just let it go. So we know that from Carter, Reagan, and some other administrations, they were aware and just actually covered it up. And this is only one example. What's the Uncom affair, right? Same thing, where 200 kilos of yellow cake disappeared. How can this happen? Does America not even protect itself?
I'm going to answer your question with 2 short anecdotes. On my very first day at the CIA, I was in the CIA auditorium with all of the other new hires. There were a few hundred of us. And we were given a series of briefings by the CIA's most senior officials, the director, the deputy director, the head of security, the head of personnel, people like that, the head of counterintelligence. And the head of security told us that day that one of the things that we had to be very conscious of was counterintelligence, that there were countries out there that meant to do us harm. For example, there's a restaurant that's very near CIA headquarters. It's a popular steakhouse, and we were forbidden from eating there because the KGB assumed that we all ate there. And so at any given time, the restaurant is full of KGB officers. Well, he said, as another example, the Israeli government has 2 declared intelligence officers in the United States. Declared means they came to us and they said, these are representatives of the intelligence services. This is the name. This is where they live. This is what they're working on. 1 Shin Bet and 1 Mossad. He said, there are 189 undeclared Israeli intelligence officers active in the United States, according to the FBI, spread all around the country, and they're here to steal our defense secrets. Now, why don't we do something about that? Because the Israelis have been so successful at cultivating blind support on Capitol Hill. We don't dare do anything about it. That's why Jonathan Pollard was such an unusual case. You know, in 1985, the so-called Year of the Spy, Jonathan Pollard was caught red-handed working for the Mossad. And he was sentenced to 30 years, and he did the entire 30 years. And every time a new president came into office in the United States, the Israelis would beg us to let him go and let him return to Israel. Well, it got so bad that at one point, Bill Clinton was going to let him go. And George Tenet went to see Bill Clinton and said that if you let Jonathan Pollard go, I'll resign. Everybody in a leadership position at the CIA resign, and the entire leadership of the intelligence community will resign. And so he didn't do it. But this gives you an example of the grasp that the Israelis have on us. I'll give you another anecdote rather. A dear friend of mine and his wife served in Israel, CIA officers, and they were declared to the Israeli government. So they're not doing anything. The husband was studying Arabic. The wife was working with the Israelis. So they go to the ambassador's Christmas party. They arrived at the 1st of September, and that December they go to the ambassador's Christmas party. And when they came home, all of their living room furniture had been rearranged while they were at the party. Okay, now that's a message. The message is, we can do whatever we want, whenever we want, and there's nothing you can do to stop us. Okay. A few months pass. They go to another dinner party. They come home. And people had defecated in all of the toilets in their house. They had taken a shit in all of the toilets in the house and didn't flush. That's another insulting message that there's nothing you can do. Nothing. We're watching you. We can come in your home anytime we want. The third time it happened, they were just getting ready to leave to come back to the United States, and the ambassador had a going away party for them. When they got home from that party, the dog was whimpering. It was crying. Somebody had cut the dog's tail off and wrapped it in gauze. That's the relationship that we have with the Israelis. It's very one-sided. But the political reality in the United States is there's really nothing you can do about it.
There is a not to underestimate a danger here. I mean, the Israelis bombed the Iranian embassy in Syria, hoping
Yes,
to
they
draw.
did.
I mean, that's I don't know how many attempt to finally draw the U.S. into an attack to Iran. Yeah.
Yes.
But it's so blatant and also so transparent. Not even a mentally incapacitated president of the U.S. Fell for it. Yeah.
That's
but
right.
It's the attempt that counts, right?
It's the attempt that counts. That's right. They tried repeatedly to draw the Iranians into a war, and the Iranians have shown great restraint through this whole process. They just haven't taken the bait.
Yeah. What was the story actually? Iran retaliated, but very controlled. They even informed the Americans. They did. What's the story here? What's the story?
They did. They sent hundreds of drones, but the drones were slow. It took 6 hours between when they were launched until they entered Israeli airspace. They informed the Americans in advance. They informed the Jordanians that these drones would be overflying Jordanian territory. And then the Israelis shot down all but like 7. There were hundreds of them, and there were like 7 that got through. So on the one hand, you show your public, we've retaliated. On the other hand, there's no damage really. And you bested the Israelis by not being drawn into a fight. But then on the third hand, this was really an Iranian victory because the Iron Dome is supposed to be flawless. And it's not. There were 7 drones that you can buy at a hobby shop or on Amazon.com that got through the vaunted Iron Dome. That was an incredible intelligence collection lesson for the Iranians.
Yeah, and it took the Americans. You said it already. The Americans were involved. I think the Saudis were involved. Jordan, of course. So it took multiple countries to make sure that no bigger damage. Yeah, so Israel is not as invincible as it wants to present itself.
No, it's not.
Yeah. If you go back to October 7th, so out of pure interest, curiosity, how, as far as you can tell, I mean, you're out of the agency for quite a while, yeah? But how does this, or how did the CIA view October the 7th, as far as you can tell? I mean, I'm asking for one specific thing. So what struck me immediately is the delayed response. So I have different numbers, yeah, but there were between 20 and 29. On 20 to 29 different places, the defense was breached. Yeah,
yes.
And in some instances, it took almost 2 days for the military to arrive in a country that is so small that the airplane or even Apache helicopter is in minutes there. Yeah, and then they shoot their own people, but that's a different story. Yeah?
Yes.
But the delayed response. What's your view on that?
The way I heard it, there were multiple organizations warning Netanyahu's office and the Ministry of Defense that an attack was going to come from Gaza. But
Egypt warned Israel twice. Egypt formally warned.
Yes,
twice.
You're exactly right. Twice. Because listen, everybody's listening to the same communications, right? You've got the Egyptians, the Americans, the Saudis, the Jordanians, the Israelis. Everybody's listening to the same cell phones and walkie-talkies and however people are communicating. But Itamar Ben-Gvir, the Minister of National Security, one of these criminals, these convicted hate crime felons, that's now in a position of import in Israel, thought he was smarter than everybody else and said, no, there will be an attack, but it's going to come from the West Bank. And it was Itamar Ben-Gvir that insisted that the necessary response teams were transferred to the West Bank, specifically outside of Nablus. And then, of course, the attack came on 29 points up along all along the border between Israel and Gaza. It's a complete and total failure, not an intelligence failure. The intelligence was there, but a policy failure. Yeah. And another thing, too, the Israeli settlers along the line with Gaza, the Israeli settlers over the years have been given communications equipment. And they're also listening to these communications, Palestinian communications. And they were reporting back to the central government, something's happening. The Palestinians are experimenting with gliders and balloons. Somebody needs to get down here and fix this. And nothing happened.
So again, what do you make of the delayed response? What's your interpretation?
I really believe the Israelis were asleep at the switch. This was a failure. Plus, I don't mean to get too dark, but I think the Israelis were also looking for a reason to strike back with 1,000 times more power than what the Palestinians used against them on October 7th. I really believe that the Israelis expected that nobody would raise an eyebrow with 40 or 50 or, according to the Lancet, 186,000 deaths.
Yeah, there was I have a document. It's not mine. Yeah, I can link it. I will link it in the description of this interview. There is a leaked document from a formal Israeli function. I don't know what it was. Ministry of something. Yeah, not of defense. Yeah, 3 days after October 7th, where they already had ready plans to rid all of Gaza of all of Palestinians, and they even described in which countries to put them. Yeah, and the reasoning was that a let's say expulsion of the Palestinians would be less damaging to Israel's global image than to kill them. Yeah, I mean that blunt. And this was 3 days. Again, it's a leaked document. Yeah, I will link it in the description from an official Israeli. I have to see, Ministry of whatever, yeah. So these plans, they were ready made, yeah. And for Netanyahu, of course, for him personally, October the 7th was a God-sent gift, given the demonstrations that,
Otherwise, he might be in prison today. If there had not been an October 7th, he might be in prison on corruption charges. The longer he can drag this war out, the longer he can remain as prime minister. He's arguably the most unpopular single politician in all of Israel. But he's also the longest serving politician in the history of Israel, or the longest serving prime minister. And he knows what trouble he's in. So the longer he can drag this out, the longer he remains free.
Given that it's more and more likely, to say prudent, that Trump will be the next president in the US. Yeah? If that happens, how will that affect the situation in Gaza?
Yeah,
as far as you can tell.
I'm very, very deeply worried about this. There has never been a more blindly pro-Israel president than Donald Trump. Blindly knee-jerk pro-Israel. It was Trump that moved the American embassy, for example, from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. It was Trump that closed the Palestinian office in Washington and expelled all the Palestinian diplomats. Excuse me. It was Trump who said during the 2016 campaign that he could solve the Arab-Israeli conflict in a day. Well, he did that by screwing the Palestinians. Right? I mean, if that's your solution, just to give the Israelis literally everything they want and to screw the Palestinians, okay, then there is no problem. I fear that it would be much, much worse if Donald Trump is elected again. Now, listen, a week ago I actually did say Donald Trump was going to be president again. But now Joe Biden's out of the race. Kamala Harris maybe is not as unpopular as we thought she was. She's going to make a vice presidential pick. That may give her a bump. So I'm optimistic that we actually have a race on our hands now. But I think Donald Trump is a dangerous madman. Yeah, really. Looking at the names that are being floated for vice president, almost all of these names help the Democrats. Excuse me. We're talking about, without getting too far down into the weeds, Kamala Harris, to win the presidency, needs to win all of the solidly Democratic states that Joe Biden won. That's easy. But she needs to win Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin.
The
There are
swing
seven
states, I believe, right?
swing states. There are 7 swing states. There are those 3, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, North Carolina, Nevada, Arizona, and Georgia. If she can just win Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, she would win 272 to 268 in the Electoral College, and she'll beat him. So she's considering the governor of Pennsylvania, the governor of Michigan, the governor of North Carolina. She's considering a bona fide American hero in Senator Mark Kelly from Arizona, which is another one of the swing states. So I think we really do have a race now. And another thing, other thing, if I could point it out, is before he was shot, after he was shot, for the last 6 months, Donald Trump has been absolutely stuck at 46%. So nothing that has happened has bumped him over 46%. Joe Biden was at 39%. Kamala Harris is now at 45%. She'll get a bump in the polls once she picks a vice president, which will be in the next 2 or 3 weeks. So I think she can win it. It's going to be tough, but I think she can win it.
Surprised. I'm surprised. I didn't think so. But, and again, I didn't want to go in this direction, and maybe very briefly. So the assassination attempt of Donald Trump, right? The roof was completely unprotected. How on earth can this happen? I mean, I know the head of the Secret Service stepped down today, or today,
this morning.
But how is this possible? Because the roof was sloped. Come on. I mean,
and it
for
was
you
sloped,
as a CIA,
it was sloped like this. It's barely.
Yeah, it's
sloped.
like
yeah, right. Like snow wouldn't even fall off of it. It was that not sloped.
And people were screaming, "Here's a gun! Here's a gun!" For 2 or 3 minutes. They were trying to. But the fact that there was no sniper on that roof, no CIA sniper on, no Secret Service sniper on that roof. What? Mm-hmm. I mean, is that just oversight or I mean, pure,
It was a catastrophic example of an organization's inability to do its job. It was the worst failure in the Secret Service since 1981, when Ronald Reagan was shot in the chest and the stomach. Listen, I don't mean to be harsh, but I've worked with these people for 35 years, and most of them have their heads up their asses. They're great with guns, but they're just not very bright. And over the years, you get more and more comfortable with the technology, and you feel or act like you don't really need to do the training. 10 years ago, 20 years ago, this would never have happened. Like, did we learn no lessons with John Kennedy? Did we learn no lessons with Ronald Reagan? That's one thing. Another thing, I had a great friend at the CIA. He had spent 30 years at the Secret Service. Michael Mastrovito, he's died since. But he was the founder of the Secret Service's Office of Intelligence. And he was fired from the Secret Service because as the head of intelligence, he used to review threatening letters to the president. And there was a woman in San Francisco, Sarah Jane Moore, who would write these letters all the time, almost every day. I'm going to kill the president. I'm going to kill the president. I'm going to kill the president. So he flew to San Francisco and he went to her apartment. And he said, Sarah Jane, I keep getting these letters. You're not really going to kill the president, are you? And she said, no, I'm sorry. I was angry about the environment and I was depressed, or the president said something on the news that made me angry. I'm not going to kill the president. 2 weeks later, President Gerald Ford flies to San Francisco for a campaign rally. Sarah Jane Moore is in the audience. She pulls out a .45 and she fires 6 shots and tries to kill the president. That's the problem in the Secret Service. There's no follow-up. There's no sense of mission. The Secret Service is more likely to be in the news for Secret Service agents getting in trouble in Colombia, for example, for going down there on an advance trip, getting prostitutes, and then refusing to pay them and then one of them left his badge in the hotel room and the prostitute took it, then they are protecting the President of the United States.
And they have a massive budget, right? Which brings me to the military industrial complex. So as far as you can tell, or in your time, and especially, I mean, relating this now to Israel, yeah? I mean, the weapons that being shipped from America to Israel is a bonanza for those companies who produce them, right? So we talk about billions here. So, I mean, where are they, how should I say this? There are no real incentives to stop this, right? From that perspective.
No way. Huh? Listen, after September 11th, we transitioned into a permanent wartime economy. A permanent wartime economy. It's not an accident that there are more millionaires in the Washington area than anywhere else in America, including Silicon Valley. And so if we were to cut the defense budget, and our defense budget is so enormous that it's more than the 8 next largest countries combined, right? If we were to cut that budget, we would go into a depression in this country, an economic depression. We've made the situation so dangerous for ourselves. It's like a drug addict who says, well, I'm just going to smoke crack once. And then you realize, wow, that crack is great. I'm going to smoke it again and again and again and again, to the point now the first thing you say in the morning is, I have to smoke crack. And that's all you can think about all day long. That's how it is with our defense budget. Yeah.
But the interest rates of American debt is now higher than the budget for the defense. So
that's right.
I mean, America was, that's me being black, yeah, and I'm European, right? I live here in the safety of the Netherlands, yeah. But America benefited from the last 2 world wars massively, especially on the Second World War, right? Now they have this debt crisis, which is actually unhandleable.
Yes.
Would it not be, tempting for the US? And, we are seeing the world going further and further in this funnel of violence and global confrontations. Yeah. At the same time that America gets weaker, nevertheless, they still have 11 carrier groups and I think 900 military bases around the world. You have to consider 900 military bases, some of which have 60,000 people, like in Japan, Okinawa, right?
Yes.
So this massive overblown body of arms, soldiers, more and more private, yeah, military industrial complex. So it's not there an incentive for the US in general? Don't ask me who, yeah, to go in that direction, like a larger confrontation.
Yeah. Yes, I think it's almost inevitable. And then, from a policy perspective, we can't understand how the Chinese have so many successes, right? We can't understand that when the US, for example, goes to Africa and says, oh, let us build a base here. It'll help to protect you. And the Chinese go and say, hey, let us build a highway and an airport for you. It'll help your economy develop. That they choose the Chinese. We just can't understand that. And so you're right. The inevitable outcome is going to be war. Why prepare for war for decades with these massive budget expenditures if you're not going to do anything with it? And so I think we should all fear a policy decision to go to war. For example, it seems to me that we have a policy of trying to provoke the Chinese, especially in the South China Sea. And we don't do it alone. We do it with the help of Japan and South Korea and the Philippines and Australia and even New Zealand. Why? What do we get out of that other than more defense expenditures?
That's a very dangerous development. If the proxy war between the US and Russia in Ukraine would not be already dangerous enough.
That's right.
If the situation in Gaza, Israel, Iran would not have already enough potential to, no, we need another bigger war with China. Right?
That's exactly right.
That's really.
I remember
really
conversations in the first decade of the 21st century conversations at the White House where people would say, well, of course we can fight two wars at the same time. Of course we can. But no analysis was ever made of how you fight a two-front war. You're fighting in Afghanistan and you're fighting in Iraq. And then you have to worry about the Russians and the Chinese and everybody else at the same time. It doesn't make any sense.
America will learn when the first supercarrier sinks. Yeah, but then,
That's right.
then there's my concern. These ships, they have nuclear, not small ones, even nuclear reactors on board. Yeah,
Yes,
if
they
such
do.
a carrier sinks and he's like 2, 3, 4, 5,000 meters times 3 is feet. Yeah, feet on the bottom of the sea with an active nuclear reactor. I mean, not even talking about the pollution, the radioactive pollution, but this thing
Yes.
could blow. This
Yes.
could be a massive. I mean, it's just mind blowing. Yeah.
Awful. Terrible.
And the Chinese have now rockets which can destroy carriers.
Carriers.
Right? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. John, you gave me an hour. We have 1.5 minutes left. Yeah, I could go on for. Yeah. Is there anything that briefly? I mean, of all your career, it's just incredible. There are so many things. Yeah. But is there any one particular item that you would like to mention? One question that I like to ask my guests is, through your career, and you have had an illustrious career, are there one or two situations, events, whatever, that really stuck out for you as a person?
Yeah. There were several. I think the most important one was realizing that I was not alone when I stood up for human rights at the CIA. I really believed I was alone, but the support that I got behind the scenes was incredible. The day after I blew the whistle on the torture program, a retired deputy director of the CIA, very, very important man, you would recognize his name, he emailed me and he said, "You've chosen a difficult path, but I'm glad somebody did. I only wish I had had the guts to do it myself." And that meant the world to me. I realized that I wasn't alone. And you said something at the very start of the podcast. The price has been very high, but it was absolutely worth it. Either we're going to be this shining example of respect for human rights and civil liberties, or we're not. But we can't be hypocrites. So that was the most important lesson I learned.
It's thanks to people like you that this kind of information comes out. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
With your dedication, with your risk. I mean, there must be I'm sure you paid a personal price in your relationships, family, friends. You definitely learned who your real friends were, right?
And I'm single now.
And
yes.
Oops. Is that a good thing?
Oh yeah, you really get to know who your friends are. Yes, indeed.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. John, on that note, I hit my hour. I went not over the time. Thank you so much. And we will stay in touch. Okay?
Thank you. I look forward to that. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure.